Welcome to Mr. Clark's Iranian Political Institutions
lecture.
You're allowed to say lecture.
Welcome everybody to another lecture. This is several takes in, so forgive your old teacher for his technological inadequacies. But today we're going to pick up with our discussion of Iran, and we're going to cover the political institutions today. So Iran has a unique form of government with both a democratic and theocratic elements. As you can see in the diagram in front of you, the elected institutions include the president and parliament, who work together to create a cabinet that runs most of Iran's economy, which is primarily state-owned, as much as 80% of it. On the other side, you see the unelected institutions with a supreme leader who really is over everyone, who appoints both the head of the armed forces and the judiciary, as well as the expediency council. And then you have the guardian council that kind of bridges the gap between the two. Today we'll be discussing the various bodies of this complex form of government, and hopefully you'll understand why the College Board chooses this country to study, because of its both unique democratic and theocratic sides. So we'll start off today with the president. The president is elected for 4 years and can serve no more than 2 consecutive terms, much like the United States. The Constitution describes him as the second highest ranking official in the country. He's the head of the executive branch of power and is responsible for ensuring the Constitution is implemented. In practice, the president's powers are circumscribed by the clerics and conservatives in Iran's power structure and by the authority of the supreme leader. It's the supreme leader and not the president who controls the armed forces and makes decisions on things like security, defense, and foreign policy. And what's more is all presidential candidates are vetted by the Guardian Council, which has banned hundreds of hopefuls from each election. Today the president is Hassan Rouhani, and he's an Iranian politician, and he's serving as the 7th president of Iran. And he's been serving since 2013, so he's into his second term with only really a year and a half left. Before that, he was a lawyer, academic, former diplomat, and of course, an Islamic cleric. Before him, the president was the mayor of Tehran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And he was president in 2005 and had 2 terms as well. And then prior to him was President Rafsanjani, President Khatami. Rafsanjani is who Ahmadinejad beat. So this is the office of president. That's who the last 3 presidents were. Next, we'll discuss the cabinet. Before we discuss the cabinet, I want to talk about that picture. That picture is a picture of the city of Qom, Qom, which is considered holy by Shia Islam. And the reason is it's because it's the shrine of Fatima bint Musa, who is the sister of the Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida. So that is kind of their holy center of Iran, and where the theocratic side of the government calls home. Again, before we talk about the structure of the cabinet, I also want to highlight, because the cabinet kind of deals with the bureaucracy of everyday life in Iran, it's also with the executive, the people that are supposed to be in charge of the coronavirus outbreak. And Iran has been uniquely bad at that. They were already dealing with a suffering economy, both from economic sanctions, low oil prices, as well as lack of economic diversity. And on top of that, they control the information. And so unless their information is very proactive, that's where people are supposed to get their information. And they've chosen to try and save the economy over the people thus far. And they're kind of numbers that they're releasing is something like 50,000 cases and 3,000 deaths, but public health experts think that it's really bad in Iran because they're choosing not to quarantine and not to give the people the education necessary to protect themselves. On March 29th, Rouhani, the current president, said that the government had to weigh the economic effects of the mass quarantine first. And in his own words, we must put these principles together to reach a final solution, meaning the balance between health and the economy. But instead, really, they didn't really find that balance, and they've not provided medical equipment necessary to do it. So that's one failed cabinet response of the government. Let's talk about the cabinet now proper. So members of the cabinet are also called the Council of Ministers. They're chosen by the president, but they must be approved by Parliament. And Parliament has rejected some nominees in the past. And the Supreme Leader also is closely involved in decisions that the cabinet makes because he has ultimate decision over defense, security, and foreign policy, which obviously weighs in on the decision-making of the cabinet. Reformist ministers under former President Khatami were heavily monitored by the Supreme Leader and conservatives. So basically, the more reformist you are, the more westernizing, the more belief in free market principles, the more that the Supreme Leader has chosen to crack down. But the cabinet runs a very important part. A lot of it is corrupt because it's state-owned. They're, huge business leaders or people within that cabinet that do yield a lot of power and authority, but also have the potential to butt heads with the Supreme Leader, which is never in their interest. Next, we'll talk about the Iranian parliament, or the Majlis. It's a 290-member parliament, and it's elected by popular vote every 4 years. It has the power to introduce and pass laws, as well as summon and impeach ministers or even the president. But all bills that are passed in the Majlis have to be approved by the conservative Guardian Council. And so it needs to get past that, which basically interprets the laws and how close they are to Sharia law and whether they're in the will of the Supreme Leader. So the Majlis did have, for a 4-year period, reformist majority in the year 2000, but by 2004, the Supreme Leader and the Guardian Council responded by eliminating almost all of the reformists from being able to run and vetoing them from being able to run, so then the conservatives took back over. The current Speaker of the Parliament is Ali Larijani. Next, let's talk about the Assembly of Experts. I've got several slides of this, but it's no more important. I just found some cool descriptions of that in picture form online. So the responsibilities of the Assembly of Experts are to appoint the Supreme Leader and monitor his performance, as well as remove him if he's deemed incapable of fulfilling his duties, which obviously has not happened. The Assembly usually holds 2 sessions per year. The body is officially based in the holy city of Qom, like we mentioned from a prior slide, but sessions are also held in Tehran and Mashhad. Direct elections for the 86 members of the current assembly are held every 8 years, with the next election going to be 2022. Only clerics can join the assembly, and candidates for election are vetted by the Guardian Council. So they have to have that stamp of approval by the Guardian Council before they're able to run, which kind of guarantees their conservative leans and conservative interpretations of Sharia law. The assembly is also, the current chairman is Ayatollah Ahmad Janati, and he's an Iranian Shia cleric and obviously a conservative politician. Now, I kind of wanted to show these. So based on the Constitution, the Assembly of Experts is above all 3 branches of government. Their main tasks are to select, monitor, and dismiss the Supreme Leader. So that's their primary function. And the qualification of the parliamentary candidates is the responsibility of the Guardian Council. even though 5 out of the 12 members of the council are members of the Assembly of Experts. But the Supreme Leader still gets veto power, and he decides to qualify a candidate. And in that instance, the discretion of the Guardian Council would not be necessary. The Assembly of Experts has 7 different commissions, and each of those commissions meets every 6 months to kind of monitor the policies in their relation to the way that things are currently being interpreted. And then one thing you should really know about the Assembly of Experts is everyone is old. The 70% of it are 70 or older, the youngest member is 50, and the average age is 71. And so think about your grandparents or people in your lives that are over 70. They tend to be more conservative and more desirable for the way that things were when they were younger, or the way that they perceived things were when they were younger, and they tend to have a more conservative stance on things. All right, next we will discuss the Guardian Council. So the Guardian Council is the most influential body in Iran, and it's currently controlled by the conservatives. It consists of 6 theologians appointed by the Supreme Leader, and then 6 jurists nominated by the judiciary and approved by Parliament. Members are elected or appointed as a 6-year basis, and they alternate it. Unlike the Majlis that is every 4 years and everyone rotates during that time, this one's staggered so that half the membership changes every 3 years. The council has to approve all bills that are passed by Parliament and has the power to veto them if it considers them inconsistent with Sharia law. It also has the power to initiate legislation if they deem it necessary, and so it can just surpass Parliament if it so decides to. The council can also bar candidates from standing in elections to Parliament and the presidency and the Assembly of Experts. Reformist attempts have attempted to reduce the council's vetting powers, but they've largely proven unsuccessful. At times, the Guardian Council has been cognizant of dissent and allowed it to exist in a minority form, allowing fewer reformists to stand while not eliminating all of them. Here's another diagram that kind of mirrors the one that we started the lecture with, but I thought that different people learn from different visual representations, so I actually have 3 of these in the presentation. Here you can see the Supreme Leader over everyone, and you can see that he appoints the head of the judiciary. You can see voters are the ones that elect the president, the parliament, and the Assembly of Experts. And remember, it is the Assembly of Experts that chooses the Supreme Leader, but then of course the Supreme Leader vets all of them, president, parliament, and Assembly of Experts. So he can prevent people from running for those positions. So the Supreme Leader still has a lot of control over who sits in those areas. You can see the Supreme Leader to the right of them. You can see the Expediency Council above, and then of course you see the Guardian Council has 12 seats that is both chosen by Parliament and appoints 6 from the head of the judiciary, which basically comes at the will of the Supreme Leader. So you can see the president's supposed to be the second most powerful person, and I don't know that is the case, because the Guardian Council kind of decides almost everything, and the Supreme Leader decides the Guardian Council. So, as well as the Expediency Council. But one thing we do know is that the Supreme Leader is the most powerful person in Iran. So the role of the Supreme Leader in the Constitution is based on the ideas of the founder of the revolution of 1979, which is the Ayatollah Khomeini. He positioned the leader at the top of Iran's political power structure. The Supreme Leader currently is Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and he appoints his job, as passed down by Ayatollah Khomeini from 1979, is he appoints the head of the judiciary, the 6 members of the powerful Guardian Council, the commanders of all the armed forces, the Friday prayer leaders, and even the head of the radio and TV stations. He also confirms president's elections. The leader is chosen by the clerics who make up the Assembly of Experts, which is democratically elected. Oftentimes there's tension that exists between the current president or other secular leaders and the supreme leader. And the supreme leader, even though his power is unrivaled, because his authority is derived from his legitimacy as the head of Shia in Iran, he has to be careful over when to exert his influence and when to balance in favor of conservatism and when to kind of let a little bit of reformism flourish a little bit. And so that's kind of the balancing act that the supreme leader does in order to maintain this two-system sort of government, even though the supreme leader controls the majority of the authority. Next, let's talk about the Expediency Council. So it was that thing in the top right-hand corner of the last power structure that we looked at. They're also known as the Expediency Discernment Council. What it is an administrative assembly. It's appointed by the supreme leader and was created in the revision of the Constitution from 1988. It was originally set up to resolve differences or conflicts between the Majlis and the Guardian Council, but its true power lies more in its advisory role now to the supreme leader. One thing that was said about it, according to Human Majd, was that it's delegated some of its own authority to the council and granting it supervisory powers over all branches of the government. And so the Expediency Council has come to be something that's very powerful since 2005, when Ahmadinejad came in as the president. Next is the head of the judiciary. So our current head of the judiciary is the Chief Justice Ibrahim Raisi, R-A-I-S-I. His background is an Iranian politician and a Muslim cleric, of course, and he's been appointed since March 7th, 2019. To know when we discuss Iranian judiciary, we usually talk about whether a country's judiciary is independent or not. Iran's is absolutely not independent of political influence. So until early last century, it was controlled entirely by the clergy. And the system was later secularized, but after the revolution of 1979, the Supreme Court revoked all the previous laws that were deemed un-Islamic, and it made the new basis of Sharia law as the litmus for whether a law was correct or not. The judiciary ensures that the Islamic laws are enforced and defines what legal policy is. It also nominates the 6 lay members of the Guardian Council, which we've already discussed. And the head of the judiciary, we know, currently Ibrahim Raisi, is appointed by the supreme leader. So one of the current tools that's being used by that the judiciary is being used as is to undermine reforms by imprisoning reformist personalities and journalists who want more westernized open free markets or a challenge or a secularization of the law. And so that's one way that the judiciary is currently being used. Lastly, let's discuss the armed forces. The armed forces comprise of the regular armed forces and the Revolutionary Guard. And it's important to draw the distinction between the two because the Revolutionary Guard is thought to enforce Sharia law, and it's less a secular manner and more kind of just like the repressive arm of the supreme leader. But if you're talking about spectrum, in terms of the armed forces, the regular armed forces protect the borders of Iran, and the Revolutionary Guard is in charge of vetting out corruption or secularization or anti-Sharia law enemies within the state. And so think of it as some not so secret police that is vigilant of enforcing conformity among citizens of Iran. The all leading army and Revolutionary Guard commanders are appointed by the supreme leader and are answerable only to him. And the Revolutionary Guard was formed after the revolution to protect the new leaders and institutions and to fight anyone opposing the revolution. Today, the Revolutionary Guard is a very powerful force in all institutions and all sectors of the cabinet, and they control volunteer militias and branches in every town. So here's the last display of what a demonstration of what it looks like. It's a complex political system. Iran's political system combines elements of democracy and religion, and institutions controlled by the supreme leader are balanced by an elected president and parliament. As you can see, the voters, again, choose the president and the parliament, as well as the assembly of experts. And then the president and parliament get together to create the cabinet, and then the experts choose the supreme leader, who has his advisors like the Expediency Council, and then the supreme leader is also in charge of the media, justice, mosque, and the military. And one of the advisors would also be the judiciary that is appointed by the supreme leader. So that is Iran's political institutions, both democratic and theocratic, with the religious side being able to trump all. And everything has to be in favor of Sharia law, and that is interpreted entirely by what constitutes Sharia law is entirely interpreted by the supreme leader.